Hi class, and welcome to the module on conducting literature reviews and using APA format. As a bit of an overview, I'll talk a little bit about why we conduct literature reviews. I'll cover the nuts and bolts of searching for and synthesizing literature, and then I'll talk a little bit about APA format at the end of this lecture. So we review literature to inform our own research process. I talked a little bit about that in the last module. We use that to develop our research question, to design the research. Often we conduct literature reviews to synthesize the literature. And so for the paper in this course, we'll synthesize literature on a particular topic. You'll talk about the methods and synthesize some of the information that you have about methods. But synthesizing the literature may also be for an introduction for a paper, to establish a problem or a need for research, to lead the reader into your research question. For you guys, you'll be doing a standalone review of the literature. We also conduct literature reviews to inform practice, to understand how we should handle particular situations, what kind of evidence might inform the way that we think about a particular issue or a problem that we're having. And so these standalone literature reviews, one of the key pieces of them is establishing some context. So what are you talking about and what are you not talking about? There is a tremendous amount of literature out there, and so it is never possible to review all of the literature on a topic. And so we always have to make choices about what we're covering and what we're not covering. And I think it's a hard thing to learn when you have done enough and what kinds of literature are most appropriate in different situations. And that's something I'll work with you guys to help you learn how to understand and present those kinds of decisions as you write. These literature reviews should also explain the importance of a particular topic. So why should I care about reading your literature review? Provide a concise overview of the literature with some defined boundaries. So if you say that you're going to cover X, Y, and Z, you should cover X, Y, and Z. And literature reviews, these standalone literature reviews should really give the reader some sort of a take-home message. So what are the things that you know now? What are your critiques of the literature, methods, samples, measurements, operationalizations of concepts? I think it's always good to be careful in those critiques. You never know who you're writing for, who knows who, and I think no research is ever perfect. This process is inherently a flawed process in a lot of ways, and we can never do everything in one single study. And so I think it's really important to be critical, but not a jerk when we're doing these kinds of reviews. And it's also important to think about what researchers should be doing next based on what you know now and your critique of the existing literature. And then thinking about the questions that you still have. What are the gaps that still exist in the literature? What would we still need to know to be able to better inform practice, future research, things like that. And so I'll talk a little bit about the nuts and bolts of finding literature. I'll also post a lecture from the library that goes over some of these processes and makes it a little bit more specific to the Widener Library. So many of you probably already know about academic databases like PsycInfo. PubMed is one that's used for more medical or public health literature. Looking at journal table of contents, I think one of the best things to do, especially if you have a sense of your research interest already, are to set up automatic alerts for different journals. So for example, Journal of Sex Research, Archives of Sexual Behavior, Journal of Interpersonal Violence. If there are topics in journals that you know publish content that is particularly relevant for you, you can go in and set up an email alert such that they'll email you every time a new issue comes out. And then you can skim the table of contents and make sure that you're always pulling articles that are relevant to you. And that's a nice way to stay sort of up to date and look and find research. Reference lists of existing papers that you have, particularly ones that are really relevant for you. Always make sure you skim through their reference list and find any articles that you may not have come across in any other way. And I'll talk a lot about Google Scholar. There's a ton of refinement options in Google Scholar, plus it integrates with most reference software, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. It used to be that a lot of people would say you can't just rely on Google Scholar, that you should also look in academic databases, PsycInfo, PubMed. That's generally true. Google Scholar does, however, integrate with a lot of those and pull from a lot of those databases as well. So I'll have to say I almost only use Google Scholar at this point. So I'll talk a little bit about some Google Scholar tips. I think people often don't fully utilize Google Scholar, so I'll spend a little bit of time talking about how to better use Google Scholar. So there are a lot of settings within Google Scholar that I think it's important to look on a little bit. My Google Scholar, based on my citations and the things that I have published, gives me some suggestions for articles that it thinks I might like. And Google Scholar also gives me metrics based on what I have published. You can set up alerts for yourself within Google Scholar as well. And so you can get alerts when there's articles that are published in certain journals or on certain topics. You can look at your citations if you are publishing. You can save things to your own library within Google Scholar. But let's look at settings, and I'll show you a couple of things within here. So over here, on search results, it's searching articles, and right now it's set to don't show any citation import links. If you decide to use a reference software, and I'll talk a little bit in just a second about what those reference softwares are and why you should use them, I think, you can click on this, show links to import citations, and I use EndNote. Here at Widener, we have access to RefWorks. So for those of you who are getting access to that, you could choose RefWorks here, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. I'm going to choose EndNote because that's what I use, and I'll save that, and I'll actually come back and do a couple more things in here. One of the other things that I do are library links, and so for example, you can put in here Widener University, and it will hopefully find Widener. It did not, but I can actually find Hunter College usually comes up in here. So Hunter College, full text at Hunter, which is where I was before. I can save that, and I'll show you what that looks like in just a second when I search. If you have any accounts, you can pull those up. Under button, you can have some control over the Google Scholar button, which I actually don't use a ton and don't know a lot about. So now that we have changed some of these Google Scholar settings, let's go back here and I'll talk a little bit about how we navigate once we have searches created. So let's pull up a search. Let's do sexual assaults, alcohol, and see what comes up. And so a ton of stuff is going to come up. So often now we can actually find a ton of research available in a variety of ways online without ever going to a library website. So this article, for example, the full text of it is at nih.gov. Nowadays, any research that's funded by the federal government, any published results that come out of those studies have to be freely accessible. The idea is that the research was funded by taxpayer dollars, and so taxpayers need to be able to have access to that research and to be able to see it for themselves. So a lot of it you'll see over here. ResearchGate is a little bit like a Facebook for researchers. So often you can find full text of articles that way. As we see over here, we have import into EndNote, and that's allowing us to be able to import this article directly into our reference management software, which I'll talk about more in just a second. As I showed you before, I linked it to Hunter College's library, which I still have access to. So now it's showing me where there might be full text at Hunter College. You can eliminate patents. We almost never need those. I often will develop a bit of a custom range. Your book talks about 5 years as what a lot of people look at for the length of research they look. I usually do 10 years. So you can change this to be 2006 to 2016. and you can search again, and then you get a much smaller list there because you have more recent research. If you go over here, for example, for one of these articles, NIH.gov, and you click on the PDF there, you can see this is the HTML version, the web version. You can click over here on PDF and download the PDF over here. So often many of these articles are available for free online. You can also, for example, if you want to find out everybody who has cited a particular article. So let's say this article is one that you're really interested in. They used a measure that was really relevant to you. You can go over here and say, all right, I want to see all the papers that cited that one. And so you can go here and find out all of these different papers. There are sometimes different versions of them, and that may be relevant if there's, for example, are full text on some of them, but not on others. So we'll come back here to this original search that we did, limited to the last 10 years. Those are the sort of main things that I'll show you about. You can also import into EndNote, and I'll actually pop over here and just show you EndNote really quickly. I'll talk a little bit more about some of these reference softwares, but the basic idea of what these do is organize your literature. So you'll see here I have 5,600 articles almost saved in here, and you can organize them by author, by year, by the title. You can put different groups together and make smart groups where that will automatically put articles into a particular group as you upload them into your reference software. I think EndNote is a really great one. Most of them also do cite while you write, which means you can use EndNote with Microsoft Word, and it will build your bibliography or your reference list as you go. And so Google Scholar integrates with EndNote, with RefWorks, and also with Zotero, which is a free software. So those are the few of the sort of tricks or little helpful hints that you can use within Google Scholar to make it work a little bit better for you. I think it's also really important to understand a little bit more about how we search smarter in some ways. And so I'll talk a little bit more about the search terms and come back and show you a little bit of that in just a second. And so as we're looking for research, I think it's important to think about what we're looking for. The first thing that I always do if I'm looking at a new topic is look for review articles and meta-analyses. And sometimes I'll actually put review or meta-analysis into my search terms to try and find just those articles. And these are bigger papers that will try and summarize all previous work or most previous work on a particular topic. And those are really useful when you're conducting a literature review, especially on a topic that you may not know as well and may not be as familiar with. And then empirical articles or research articles on your topic or topics related to your topic, articles that have cited other key articles that are useful for you. So that's as the cited by, looking in the reference list for those as well. Theoretical articles are often important in providing some overview of bodies of research or knowledge. They often will define a concept, controversies around that concept, the development of a theory or critique of a theory. Often these don't emphasize methodologies quite as much, but organize the findings of previous research to make a very specific argument or a case for the theoretical framework that they are developing. And we also sometimes want to get raw data or descriptive information. And so we can go and find large surveys or data sources like cdc.gov, samhsa.gov, and that may be a great place to find all sorts of things like rates of substance use or teen pregnancy, sexual risk behavior, or sexual activity. And many of those are actually available for data analysis as well. And so we can tap into some of these huge national data sets and really be able to say interesting things about trends over time. That's some of the work that I have done, looking at trends over time in sexual behavior and trying to understand what's driving those trends. As I mentioned before, we can also search within Google Scholar, within PubMed, PsycInfo, whatever, a bit smarter. And so some of you may have heard of Boolean search terms to help you carry out better searches. These Boolean operators are and, or, not, and then the parentheses. You can also use wildcard symbols, these little asterisks here, or question marks. So for example, if I were interested in substance use among HIV positive gay men, I could type in substance use HIV positive gay men. And I could also do sort of a longer search term that would be much more specific. So for example, I may be looking at gay men, but I may also want anything that uses the term MSM, which is an abbreviation for men who have sex with men. So this tells it to search for any of these terms. And I want HIV, or the full term, and I want drug or substance or addiction or abuse, but I don't want medication or adherent or adherence. So adherent asterisk will give you adherence, adherent. This will appear, this is another wild card where it will give you behavior in the American English spelling, or behavior, I-O-U-R, in the British spelling. This will get you woman or women, and so these will help you either expand or narrow your search parameters depending on what you're looking to do. And so the not will make sure that you're not getting articles about HIV medication or adherence to HIV medication, that you're actually getting sort of illicit drug use or substance abuse, if that's what you're interested in. And as you read the literature, you'll start learning about alternative and relevant terms, look at the keywords used in other abstracts, different spellings, different kinds of topics, concepts that maybe are similar to the concept that you're looking for. I think one of the challenging things sometimes is that different disciplines will sometimes talk about a very similar concept, but call it a different thing. And so sometimes we need to be able to learn the language of multiple disciplines to be able to get a really full sense of the literature on a particular concept. And so as we look through these empirical articles, I think it's worth talking just a little bit about what we're looking for and what we're looking at in these articles. The abstract is often the first thing that we look at. This is written last in most empirical articles. This is a very short summary of the entire article. When we look in the introduction, we're often looking to find their justifications or rationale for their research decisions, to find additional literature that might be relevant for us, to find their evaluation of theories and methods, to find the theories that they used. In the methods section, we're obviously looking for methodological details. And getting a sense of the sample and trying to get a sense of how that influences what kinds of conclusions we can make from the evidence that's presented here. In the results section, we're looking obviously for specific findings. One thing I'll say at this point in your academic and research careers is not to get too bogged down in the statistical analyses portion. I think so many students get to the results section and kind of throw up their hands and think, I'm never going to understand this. But really what you want to do is get that take-home message. So I would get through the results as much as you can and do your best to understand them and digest them. But also then focus on that first paragraph of the discussion, in which they'll usually provide a summary of the results in a bit more simple of language. The discussion will also help you think through the implications, and by implications I mean, what do these findings mean for practice, for other research? Why do we think that they found what they did find, and what does it mean? So it's a little bit of the so what at the end of a paper. Often at the beginning you start with a so what of why should you care about this topic, and these implications in the discussion are a bit of a so what of why should you care about my findings. The discussion section will hopefully help you understand the results and get ideas for future research and generate future questions that you may explore yourself. And as I mentioned before, references are a great place to find other research, so don't ignore these as you move into reading research articles more frequently. And so I think one of the hardest parts of doing literature reviews is moving from articles to a synthesized literature review. And so part of the process that you guys will do in your research paper is just that. And I'll give you a ton of feedback on how to make these connections, how to better think about synthesizing this research. I think one of the steps in this process could potentially be using annotated bibliographies. That's helpful for some people. Annotated bibliographies help you create a summary of each of your sources, each of your references. They should summarize or paraphrase the main points that are relevant to your research questions and your topic. You should note the sample characteristics, and these summaries should very much be in your own words so that you make sure that you're not accidentally plagiarizing. They might include a notation about how you'll use that information in your lit review. You could compare and contrast the articles to others like it, include author information or qualifications, and I think the best way to do this is in some of these reference softwares. So as I said, using software to manage literature I think is brilliant. I started doing this in grad school and kind of can't imagine a point at which I didn't ever do this. Using software can help you search for literature and review literature. It integrates with Google Scholar, as I showed you before. It also integrates with PsycInfo, PsycArticles, PubMed. This helps you organize your literature, and so you can have groups, you can search by keywords. You can also store all of your PDFs within there. So you can actually have all of your full text articles, and if you look at my library, you can get a sense of, if I have any articles in here, which I have a ton of articles, and so some of them you'll see that I have some, let's see if I can show you any of these. So you can see that I have a bunch of articles, probably some of the newer ones that I have in here. And if you go over here, I have the abstract in here. Some of these are available via URL. Others of them, I can keep the PDF right in here. So that should be in there because that's actually my own publication. But I'm not actually clicking on any that have the PDF with them, but you can keep all the PDFs in here. And so it's a great way to be able to organize yourself. As I mentioned before, the Cite While You Write allows you to create your reference list as you write. And so you're not going back at the end and typing in all the references by hand. Those are actually done for you by the time you finish the paper. And as I said, RefWorks is what we have here through Widener, and Zotero is available free online. It integrates really nicely with Google Scholar. I believe that Zotero is also the only one that integrates with Google Docs. So for those of you who use Google Docs, that might be a really good option for you. So I'll talk about some general writing tips as you think about writing your research paper. Think about beginning very broadly and gradually getting more specific. So leading the reader into the specific issues in the literature. Hooking the reader early to really show the importance of your paper. So answering the so what question and providing some context that this is an important thing we should be reading about. Thinking about translating for both the lay and experienced reader. So making sure that your writing is not too technical, ideally. And I'll talk about this a bit more in just a second, but I think avoiding regurgitation is one of the hardest things for students to learn. So really linking the concepts and ideas, ideally, I think that's possible by reading all the literature, putting it aside, paraphrasing, and then citing it. And don't just list the details. That would be an annotated bibliography. Daryl Bem once said, think about this as a short story with a single linear narrative line. So you're telling a story and you're using the literature to support that story. And so on the other side of that, the common mistakes that I see are not synthesizing the literature. So basically just providing a list of this study found this, and then this study found this, and then this study found this. And that's basically a bunch of abstracts stacked on top of one another. What I'm really looking for, and generally when you're writing lit reviews or introductions, what we're looking for is some sort of synthesis of the literature. If I wanted to look at a series of abstracts, I could look those up and find them myself, but I want to know how you connect these concepts and how you think about the application of those concepts and their connections. Another common mistake is covering irrelevant literature or irrelevant aspects of relevant literature, making inaccurate conclusions because you don't understand the literature or because you have a belief in your head about the way things are, and therefore anything that is disconfirming is something that you discount or sort of reinterpret to confirm your own ideas. And not properly searching for literature. So having a slim literature review, having literature that's not relevant or that is outdated. And so that's something that I'll definitely help you with as we go through the process of writing this research paper, making sure that you're accurately reporting on the literature, that you're synthesizing, covering relevant literature and relevant portions of the literature, and finding articles that are sort of most useful for what you're looking at. So some tips for improving writing, I think read, write, and get feedback. And so I will certainly give you feedback, a ton of feedback. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I do a video about the research paper. I will give you guys a ton of feedback over the course of the process of creating your research paper, and hopefully that will make you a better writer. So I will also post a PowerPoint lecture from the library. There's also resources on the library website about doing research. Molly Wolf is our sexuality librarian, and she's fantastic and will help you if you need help using the library, doing research on a particular topic. So utilize that resource if you need it. And I'll post that presentation. And then now I'll switch over to APA format. And APA format, probably many of you have heard of it before, used it. Hopefully you've used it in this program so far. And we use APA format to try and standardize the writing that we do, and to try and give appropriate credit to others for their research. So I'll talk about a variety of primary components of APA format. One of the things that I'll write on your papers a ton is passive voice. Passive versus active voice is something that I feel like people really struggle to understand and to learn, so I'll do a ton of work with you to help you correct that. Active voice is easier to understand, and in an active sentence, the subject is doing the action. So for example, active voice would be the participants completed a survey. Passive voice is the participants were given a survey to complete. So in that first example, the active example, the participants are the ones who are doing the action. So the subject of the sentence is actually doing the verb, the action in the sentence. Whereas in the passive voice version, the participants were given a survey. So whoever gave the survey to them is actually not included in this sentence at all. In the second example, active voice is researchers demonstrated an association between sexual satisfaction and relationship satisfaction. And a passive voice version of that would be, it was shown that there was an association between sexual satisfaction and relationship satisfaction. So we always want to aim for active voice, both because it's easier to understand and because it's APA format. So there's a link here also to the OWL Purdue website, which has a lot of information about APA format and can possibly help you think a little bit more about active versus passive voice. Numbers are also a big thing in APA format. We use numerals to express numbers 10 and above. There are certainly some exceptions to that. We also use numerals to express percentages, ages, and scores on a scale. And we use words to express numbers that are beginning a sentence. So anytime you start a sentence, you want to write out that full word instead of using the number, or you can reword the sentence. And when you're using numbers below 10, you want to use words to express those. So as you write, make sure that you pay attention to that. Plagiarism. I think I mentioned when I reviewed the syllabus that if I catch you plagiarizing, I will do my best to ruin you. And so let's talk a little bit about what that is. Plagiarism is presenting work either paraphrased or not, without attributing that work to the appropriate source. I think one of the things that students tend to move towards is then just quoting everything. And I think it's really important to understand that it's not enough to simply put quotes around a series of sentences strung together with small portions of your own ideas and call that your own. So stringing together a whole bunch of quotes is often still considered plagiarism. It's also not enough just to change a few words and cite the source. You really want to put that into your own words and credit that source. Again, if you're caught plagiarizing in this course, you'll fail the assignment and likely the course. I have made it so that you can see your Turnitin report and look at that before you turn in your final version or as you turn in your final version. And if that Turnitin report comes back to you and something pops up plagiarized, make sure that you go back and change that and turn that assignment in again. Some other common writing and formatting issues are wordiness. As you write, try and think about, as you write for academic settings in particular, try and think about being as concise as you can be. Using active voice versus passive voice will certainly help with that. The distinction between affect and effect, I think, is one that, that trips people up quite a bit. Affect is typically used as a verb. It means to influence something. So longitudinally, sexual satisfaction affected relationship satisfaction. Affect, on the other hand, indicates the result of something. It's usually used as a noun. So results indicated a significant effect of sexual satisfaction on relationship satisfaction. Semicolons versus colons is also something that tends to trip people up a little bit. Semicolons should be used to separate two independent clauses. No capitalization is necessary in the second clause. And colons should be used to separate a complete introductory clause from a second clause that may or may not be able to stand on its own, but somehow illustrates, extends, or amplifies the preceding thought. If the second clause is a complete sentence on its own, the first letter of the first word should be capitalized. So that first part of the sentence should be able to stand on its own. The second part may or may not be able to stand on its own, but it sort of helps to explain the preceding thought. Quotation marks also are something that people tend to struggle with a little bit, of when to use double versus single quotes. So pay attention to the APA format guide for that, and for when you should use block quotes. Always remember that periods and commas should be inside of the closing quotation marks. That's something that I correct a lot on papers. There's also in APA format certain situations in which we use the ampersand sign versus spelling out the word and. So for in-text citations, when we're doing a reference within the text of the paper, we can use the ampersand in parenthetical citations and use the and when we're listing a citation non-parenthetically. So if I were going to say Abby and McLaughlin, parentheses 2009, found blah, 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 I would use and in there. And if I were going to say researchers found blah, 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 parentheses, Abby and McLaughlin, 2009, I would use the ampersand in that situation. Another issue that I find myself correcting a lot in papers is making the comparisons clear. So for example, in this sentence, it says men scored higher in sexual satisfaction. That might be clear from the context around that sentence, but it would be clearer if you said men scored higher in sexual satisfaction than women, than relationship satisfaction, than in whatever. So I think it's often important to make those comparisons fairly clear. Also, when you're beginning a sentence with the word this, make sure that whatever the this is that you're referring to is clear, or add a reference to that sentence. I think students often will try and create a whole idea in a paragraph, and then at the end say, this indicates that blah, blah, blah. And by the time you've gotten to the end of the paragraph, it's not quite clear what the this is that you're referring to. So those are some things to think about as you work on writing for academic purposes, for scholarly purposes. And for APA formatting references, I will certainly spend a lot of time in your papers moving through and correcting them and trying to guide you on that. You should all have the APA publication manual. The OWL Purdue website is a great resource for you. And the library usually holds several 3 to 4 APA workshops over the course of the semester. So if this is something that you are struggling with, I would strongly encourage you to go to one of those workshops and try and brush up on your APA skills a bit. So the first quiz is available online. It's a quiz on APA format. The one thing that I will say about the quiz is that you should pay very close attention to the details. So this is an example of a question that could be on your APA format quiz. So in this situation, the question is, which of the following citations is correctly in APA format? We don't have the indentation on the side of here, so technically none of these are, but I'm going to show you which ones. So maybe pause for a second and look over all of these citations and see if you can figure out using your APA format guide, APA publication manual, which of these is correct. And then I will show you which is correct. So this third one is the one that's correctly in APA format. And so I'll show you what some of the issues are in the other ones. In this first one, the issue is that the first letter of all of these words is capitalized. It should just be this first letter of the first word that's capitalized. The rest of these should all be lowercase. In this second one, the issue is that the title of the journal and the volume number are not italicized. So in this third one, we see that only this first word is capitalized. This is italicized, as is the volume number, but not the issue number. And in this third one, what we see here is that all of this is italicized, all the capitalization in the title is correct, but in the journal title, sex and research should be capitalized. So there's a ton of detail in APA format, and as you move through the quiz, really make sure that you're taking the full time that I give you to take that quiz. That's 90 minutes. And really make sure that you're looking at the details on these questions to make sure that you're getting those correct. So that is a quick overview of conducting literature reviews. I'll talk a little bit more specifically about the research paper. I'll do a video that's specifically about that assignment, and I'll post that with the assignment. If you have questions or thoughts about APA format or literature reviews more generally, post those under the general discussion forum. Certainly as you move forward on your research paper, if you need help with that process, I'm happy to help you with that. Once you turn in your topic statements, I'll give you some feedback about finding some literature. And if you feel like you need the help, definitely reach out to Molly Wolf in the library. She's phenomenal and probably doesn't get utilized nearly as much as we should be utilizing her skills. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, thanks guys.